Chapter 24 of Great Expectations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, Chapter 24. After 2 or 3 days, when I had established myself in my room and had gone backwards and forwards to London several times, and had ordered all I wanted of my tradesmen, Mr. Pocket and I had a long talk together. He knew more of my intended career than I knew myself, for he referred to his having been told by Mr. Jaggers that I was not designed for any profession, and that I should be well enough educated for my destiny if I could hold my own with the average of young men in prosperous circumstances. I acquiesced, of course, knowing nothing to the contrary. He advised my attending certain places in London for the acquisition of such mere rudiments as I wanted, and my investing him with the functions of explainer and director of all my studies. He hoped that with intelligent assistance I should meet with little to discourage me, and should soon be able to dispense with any aid but his. Through his way of saying this, and much more to similar purpose, he placed himself on confidential terms with me in an admirable manner, and I may state at once that he was always so zealous and honorable in fulfilling his compact with me that he made me zealous and honorable in fulfilling mine with him. If he had shown indifference as a master, I have no doubt I should have returned the compliment as a pupil. He gave me no such excuse, and each of us did the other justice. Nor did I ever regard him as having anything ludicrous about him, or anything but what was serious, honest, and good, in his tutor communication with me. When these points were settled, and so far carried out as that I had begun to work in earnest, it occurred to me that if I could retain my bedroom in Barnard's Inn, my life would be agreeably varied, while my manners would be none the worse for Herbert's society. Mr. Pocket did not object to this arrangement, but urged that before any step could possibly be taken in it, it must be submitted to my guardian. I felt that this delicacy arose out of the consideration that the plan would save Herbert some expense, so I went off to Little Britain and imparted my wish to Mr. Jaggers. "If I could buy the furniture now hired for me," said I, "and 1 or 2 other little things, I should be quite at home there." "Go it?" said Mr. Jaggers with a short laugh. "I told you you'd get on. Well, how much do you want?" I said I didn't know how much. "Come," retorted Mr. Jaggers, "how much? £50?" "Oh, Not nearly so much." "£5?" said Mr. Jaggers. This was such a great fall that I said in discomfiture, "Oh, more than that." "More than that, eh?" retorted Mr. Jaggers, lying in wait for me, with his hands in his pockets, his head on one side, and his eyes on the wall behind me. "How much more?" "It is so difficult to fix a sum," said I, hesitating. "Come," said Mr. Jaggers, "let's get at it. Twice 5, will that do? 3 times 5, will that do? 4 times 5, will that do?" I said I thought that would do handsomely. "4 times 5 will do handsomely, will it?" said Mr. Jaggers, knitting his brow. "Now, what do you make of 4 times 5?" "What do I make of it?" "Ah!" said Mr. Jaggers. "How much?" "I suppose you make it £20," said I, smiling. "Never mind what I make it, my friend," observed Mr. Jaggers, with a knowing and contradictory toss of his head. "I want to know what you make it." £20, of course." "Wemmick," said Mr. Jaggers, opening his office door, "take Mr. Pip's written order and pay him £20." This strongly marked way of doing business made a strongly marked impression on me, and that not of an agreeable kind. Mr. Jaggers never laughed, but he wore great, bright, creaking boots, and in poising himself on these boots, with his large head bent down and his eyebrows joined together, awaiting an answer, he sometimes caused the boots to creak as if they laughed in a dry and suspicious way. As he happened to go out now, and as Wemmick was brisk and talkative, I said to Wemmick that I hardly knew what to make of Mr. Jaggers' manner. "Tell him that, and he'll take it as a compliment," answered Wemmick. "He don't mean that you should know what to make of it. Ho!" for I looked surprised. "It's not personal, it's professional, only professional." Wemmick was at his desk lunching, and crunching, on a hard dry biscuit, pieces of which he threw from time to time into his slit of a mouth, as if he were posting them. "Always seems to me," said Wemmick, "as if he had set a man-trap and was watching it. Suddenly, click! You're caught." Without remarking that man-traps were not among the amenities of life, I said I supposed he was very skilful. "Deep," said Wemmick, "as Australia," pointing with his pen at the office floor to express that Australia was understood, for the purposes of the figure, to be symmetrically on the opposite spot of the globe. "If there was anything deeper," said Wemmick, bringing his pen to paper, He'd be it." Then I said I supposed he had a fine business, and Wemmick said, "Capital." Then I asked if there were many clerks, to which he replied, "We don't run much into clerks, because there's only one Jaggers, and people won't have him at second hand. There are only 4 of us. Would you like to see him? You are one of us, as I may say." I accepted the offer. When Mr. Wemmick had put all the biscuit into the post, and had paid me my money from a cash-box in a safe, the key of which safe he kept somewhere down his back, and produced from his coat-collar like an iron pigtail, we went upstairs. The house was dark and shabby, and the greasy shoulders that had left their mark in Mr. Jaggers's room seemed to have been shuffling up and down the staircase for years. In the front first floor, a clerk who looked something between a publican and a rat-catcher, a large, pale, puffed, swollen man, was attentively engaged with 3 or 4 people of shabby appearance, whom he treated as unceremoniously as everybody seemed to be treated who contributed to Mr. Jaggers's coffers. "Getting evidence together," said Mr. Wemmick as we came out, "for the Bailey." In the room over that, a little flabby terrier of a clerk with dangling hair (his cropping seemed to have been forgotten when he was a puppy) was similarly engaged with a man with weak eyes, whom Mr. Wemmick presented to me as a smelter who kept his pot always boiling, and who would melt me anything I pleased, and who was in an excessive white perspiration, as if he had been trying his art on himself. In a back room, a high-shouldered man with a face-ache tied up in dirty flannel, who was dressed in old black clothes that bore the appearance of having been waxed, was stooping over his work of making fair copies of the notes of the other 2 gentlemen for Mr. Jaggers's own use. This was all the establishment. When we went downstairs again, Wemmick led me into my guardian's room and said, "This you've seen already." "Pray," said I, as the 2 odious casts, with the twitchy leer upon them, caught my sight again, "whose likenesses are those?" "These," said Wemmick, getting upon a chair and blowing the dust off the horrible heads before bringing them down, "these are 2 celebrated ones, famous clients of ours that got us a world of credit. This chap, why, you must have come down in the night and been peeping into the inkstand to get this blot upon your eyebrow, you old rascal. Murdered his master, and, considering that he wasn't brought up to evidence, didn't plan it badly." "Is it like him?" I asked, recoiling from the brute, as Wemmick spat upon his eyebrow and gave it a rub with his sleeve. "Like him? It's himself, you know." The cast was made in Newgate, directly after he was taken down. You had a particular fancy for me.